Well, folks, nothing really happened in week 6, huh? In college football. Sure hope week 7 gives us something a little better. Yeah. What a week, huh? Welcome to the DPS All Football Talk RodCast for week 7. Yeah, week 6 turned out just like we all expected, didn't it, folks? We all thought Vanderbilt would dominate Alabama, didn't we? We all thought Arkansas would beat Tennessee, didn't we? Well, that's how it goes. Dan DeSetto here for the DPS All Football Talk RodCast. We are already to week 7 in the halfway through the college football season for most teams already. I can't believe it. Before you know it, it's going to be postseason time already in college football. It's just going by way too fast. But we had a heck of a week last week, and it jumbled everything up, and the computer's trying to figure it all out. Rodney is working hard to figure all of it out. Let's start with our normal review of the top 25. Here we go. Let's bring it back up again. Here is the week 7 top 25. And last week we had a tie for the 25th position. This week we got a 3-way tie for the 18th position. There's no team 19, no team 20 this week. I don't remember ever seeing this kind of stuff, but it's crazy, folks. But yes, Texas by default has a bye week, doesn't lose, so goes back into the number 1 spot. Ohio State with a very impressive win over Iowa. Say what you want about Iowa, but beating them 35-7, that's impressive, an impressive win. This is a little bit better Iowa team, I think, than we've seen in the past, a little bit more balanced maybe. And Ohio State has no trouble with them, and they move into that number 2 spot. Oregon continues winning, and they're in the number 3 spot. Same with Penn State. Another big win for them. Georgia, the first of our one-loss teams, stays number 5. And Miami, one of the only survivors in the top 10 of the teams, goes out west to California in a late spot, has a big deficit, and Cam Ward brings them back late at night. I don't know if everybody saw that. Cam Ward with the victory, and Miami holds on and survives against California to remain unbeaten. So Alabama drops only to number 7 after the shocking loss to Vanderbilt. And let me remind you, Vanderbilt is a team that has lost to Georgia State. So Alabama's number 7. Tennessee loses to a team who has lost to Oklahoma State. Not a great Oklahoma State team this year. They're number 8. Ole Miss has a bounce-back effort against South Carolina. They're the number 9 team in the country. Clemson also avoids falling victim to upset Saturday and moves up to number 10. My Clemson Tigers are struggling on defense, ladies and gentlemen. We will talk about that again soon. Iowa State, impressive win for Iowa State. They're number 11. But one of the most impressive wins of the weekend is Texas A&M. Thoroughly clobbers Missouri. And at home there in Kyle Field, and Texas A&M, Connor Wegman Their quarterback, he's suddenly he hasn't looked good this year, and he finally puts together a really good effort. Texas A&M moves up to number 15. Utah, number 16. Boise State, the most impressive group of 5 teams so far this year, but their schedule is not anything tremendous as far as their wins. They had a good loss to Oregon. Their wins have been dominant, but they're not impressive teams. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with Boise State. Could they actually be ranked higher than the 12th seed this year if they make the college football playoff? But let's not talk about playoffs yet. It's too early in the season. We got a long way to go. There's your 3-way tie for 18th. We got Oklahoma, who was off this week, sitting, waiting for the Texas Longhorns this week in the Red River Shootout. Indiana and Kansas State all tied at 18. Missouri drops all the way down to 21st after getting completely thumped by Texas A&M. And welcome to the top 25, Pittsburgh from the ACC, undefeated Pittsburgh at number 22. Illinois hangs in there at number 23. Michigan, well, they went to Washington and got thumped. They got a 10-point loss to Washington, kind of dominated in that game. Got dominated in that game. Washington is unranked. Michigan somehow is still ranked, even though we got Army and Navy both unbeaten. Michigan is number 24. SMU continues an impressive run, and SMU takes out Louisville to remain number 25, or to join the top 25 at number 25. So that's your top 25 rundown for the year, or for the week, for week 7. And here we go. So let's talk about the DPS tiers. How did all this craziness that we had, Tennessee losing to Arkansas, Alabama losing, Miami darn near losing, how did this craziness impact the top 25, or the DPS tiers? Here we go, the DPS tiers for week 2. We only had one team drop out of the tiers. We had a couple of teams that are welcome to the tiers. And in tier number 3, joining the tiers this week, the South Carolina Gamecocks at tier number 3, ranked a tier above the Clemson Tigers. Carolina fans will be happy to hear that. They are ranked above the number 10 Clemson Tigers in the DPS tiers. Remember, this is, I remind every week, it's purely mathematical based on statistical comparison against previous champions in the DPS era. So, up in tier 1, the Tennessee Vols were by themselves last week in tier number 1. They drop out. That's the curse of being in tier 1. They drop down to tier 2. Still a really good team. We'll show you that in just a minute. Tier number 1 now, the Texas Longhorns and the Ohio State Buckeyes. And, we've said early in the year, a lot of people said that might be your national championship game. We'll see. We'll see if those two teams can hold serve in tier 1. Texas and Ohio State are your tier 1 teams right now. Iowa State hangs in there at tier 2. Ole Miss, remember the bounce back. Last week they were in tier 2, even though they had lost to Kentucky. They were in tier 2. They picked, they started off all the upset all the upset losses, I guess you'd say, by top teams, but they hung in there in tier 2, even though they had taken that loss. And this week they stay in Tier 2. They had beaten now Tier 3 South Carolina. And Miami somehow moves up a tier, even though they barely hung on and beat California out west. So that's Tier 1. Tier 2, Alabama drops down to Tier number 3. The defensive concerns in Tuscaloosa. Really good offense for the Tide. Secondary that's young and not very good, but we'll see what happens with Alabama, whether they can bounce back from that big loss, because they got to go play a Tier 3 team this week, an improved South Carolina team who will not be intimidated by the Alabama Tide because they've beaten them in the past. So not much, but they've beaten them in the past. Back when they were a number 1 team, Jeff Garcia and company beat Alabama as a number 1 team. So Alabama's got to get off the mat quickly for the game this week. Texas A&M adds themselves to Tier number 3. So welcome to the tiers, as well as Kansas State, also in Tier 3, and somehow Louisville hangs in there in Tier number 3. Don't ask me how, but that's your tiers for this week. And dropping out of the tiers this week, I don't know how they were even in there in the first place, but UCF, one of the disappointments of the season. That's the tiers. Now I want to talk about a couple things that I mentioned last week. What teams in the AP Top 25 have top offenses and top defenses? So we're going to start with which teams in the top 25 have a top 25 ranked offense and a top 25 ranked defense, both. There are many teams in the top 25 with one unit or the other ranked in the top 25 of the DPS computer stats. But there are only 6 teams that have both units currently ranked in the top 25. And we know, for those that follow the RodCast, know that all national champions in the DPS era have had both of their units, offense and defense, ranked in the top 25 at the end of the regular season. So these are the 6 teams that are theoretically in playoff in national championship contention right now. There's only 6 of them. Georgia, Tennessee, Texas, and Iowa State, believe it or not, both all with top 25 ranked offenses and defenses. I think Iowa State is grossly underrated by most people out there. They keep winning, they'll be, people will figure it out. But the 2 teams, Ole Miss and Ohio State, you see the double asterisk there? Those teams actually are the only teams in the country currently who have top 10 units in both offense and defense. So those would be your highest power teams, so to speak. All right. And then we also wanted to talk about, so week 6, after week 6 data is collected and going into week 7, that's a time when we start to look at, okay, which teams in the AP Top 25 have the best offensive unit, the best defensive units, the worst offensive units, and the worst defensive units. To me, there's one big surprise on there. We talked about it last week. We'll talk about it again. But let's start with the offenses. Sort of a surprise to me. The number 1 offense in the DPS right now is the Miami Hurricanes. The AP 6th ranked Miami Hurricanes have the best offense statistically in the country. And remember, these statistics are opponent adjusted. This is opponent adjusted using our GSA metric, opponent adjusted, number 1 in the country, Miami Hurricanes. Boise State, number 2, the 17th ranked Boise State. Broncos are your number 2 offense in the country. And as you can see, LSU looking a lot like they looked last year, number 3 in offense already. Number 13, LSU, number 3 in offense. Ole Miss, number 4 in offense. And Ohio State, number 6. So that is impressive numbers there for some of the top 25 teams, and 3 of those teams are in the AP top 10 right now. How about the worst offenses? Well, the highest ranked team with a bad offense has the very worst offense. I mentioned that. That's the BYU Cougars, number 92 in offense in the country, although they're ranked number 14 overall. Illinois, number 90 in offense. So looking for better things from the Illinois team, hanging on at the bottom of the top 25. And Michigan, number 65, the third worst offense among top 25 teams. We talked about Oklahoma, their offensive problems with being able to keep wide receivers healthy. We shall see if this improves when they get a chance to have a week of, to get better. 63rd in the nation in offense. And the Texas A&M Aggies, 49th in offense, 15th ranked in the AP, 49th in offense as the 5th worst offense in the top 25. So what about defenses, though? And here's where the shock to me is, unfortunately, as a Clemson fan. You'll see that in a minute. Tennessee, number 2 in defense in the country. Unbelievable. So who's the number 1 defense, right? They're not even ranked in the top 25. It's a team that's not ranked in the top 25. The number 1 defense, can you guess it? Insert Jeopardy music. Do, 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 do. All right. Who is the Kentucky Wildcats? Or who are the Kentucky Wildcats? Who are the Kentucky Wildcats? That's the number 1 defensive team, but they're not ranked in the AP yet. They probably will be soon, but they are the number 1 defensive team in the country. Tennessee is number 2. Number 2, Ohio State, 4th ranked defense in the country. And remember, some of these teams have had big blowout wins, and so their stats are a little bit skewed, because I don't take out garbage time in the DPS. And Rodney is all stats for the whole game. Don't take out garbage time. So these teams can sort of give up garbage yardage at the end of and it doesn't get taken out in the DPS. It is what it is. Ohio State may be even better than a 4th ranked defense. Once their schedule tightens up, we will see for real. But they've had some, they've beaten up on some bad teams early on, and their defense may actually be better than 4th. Ole Miss, number 6. I think that's probably a legit ranking because they did beat up on some bad teams early, but they also have had a couple of good, strong teams on their schedule. Oklahoma, number 9 in the country in defense, and Iowa State, number 10. We mentioned Tennessee, Ohio State, and Iowa State are the teams that have a top 20 unit in both offense and defense, the most balanced teams in the country in 2024 so far. And then the worst defenses, Boise State. I don't think anybody's shocked there, but you have to be shocked at number 10. AP ranked number 10, Clemson, 69th in the country in defense, right? Their defensive ranking moved up. It was 81 last week. It's 69 this week. Hopefully it'll continue to rise, but not a little bit concerning. The rushing defense for Clemson has fallen off the map. Let's hope, like I mentioned, they've had some big leads in games, haven't had to play, with the exception of the Georgia game where they got kind of dominated in the second half. They haven't had to play a competitive game up until last week against FSU. I'm hoping that's a little bit of fairy dust there. That's some deception there. Maybe they weren't playing their top, but usually the numbers are not too far off from reality. Concern I have as a Clemson fan. Remember, last year teams on this list, USC, we were all getting on Lincoln Riley. Lincoln Riley's case for USC being in the 80s in defensive ranking, in the 90s and 80s in defensive ranking. Clemson is 69th right now. That is something very unusual in Tiger Town. LSU, speaking of Tiger Town, they have not improved their defense enough to be championship caliber this year. LSU, once again, their offense, top 5 in the country. Defense, 62nd right now in the country. They have a long way to go to get to championship level, and in the SEC, you don't have a lot of time for that. You've got, the meat of the schedule coming up. They got to get better fast. And Missouri, same thing. Defense not impressive. They're 21st ranked after the loss this week to Texas A&M, 60th in defense. Pittsburgh, just like last year, similar, pretty good offense, and 55th in the country in defense. So those teams that you see on the bottom of the offensive scale, on the bottom of the defensive scale, those teams, you look to them to be upset, by someone in the near future. So that's it. Let's review what Rodney did last week. So we'll talk about the Rodney's against the spread and money line results. Let's start with the one top 25 matchup that we had last week, and it was a big loss. Rodney picked Missouri to cover the 2 points against Texas A&M. They didn't even come close. Texas A&M walked all over Missouri. That drops Rodney down to 9-7, 56% on AP top 25 versus top 25 matchups for the year. We've got a couple of them coming up this week as well. Looking forward to that. We'll show you that here in a little while.